So when Bernie Ecclestone was ousted as the top dog in Formula 1 and lost all of the commercial rights to, well, I wouldn't say lost all the commercial rights, but at least had the commercial rights bought out by Liberty Media, he was seen as being someone who was a bit out of touch, an old fuddy-duddy, someone who just wasn't there with the times, and the sport needed a bit of a reboot, a bit of a refresh to really kick it forward and bring it back to what we think Formula 1 should be. And with the way that Liberty Media is going with what it's doing now with Formula 1, a lot of people are going, we want Bernie back, we want it like it was in the good old days. But without Bernie Ecclestone, love him or hate him, the sport as we know it would not exist. And again, love him or hate him, we owe him a great deal of gratitude. Now, back in the 1970s, Formula 1 was in a little bit of a transitional period. Sponsors were starting to appear on cars, the circuits were starting to take safety seriously, and occasionally the sport would make its way onto television. But even then, it was an afterthought, more at a level that you would have seen the BTCC have on a Sunday afternoon on Grandstand, with the team and corporate hospitality being some sort of motorhome plonked onto some grassy area behind the garages. And at this time, Ecclestone was milling around the paddock, and he'd actually been doing it for a fair few years. In 1949, he raced, but after a series of accidents, he retired from motorsport, moving into business, particularly in property and loan financing, whilst having a side gig managing the weekend car auctions company. But he did go back to racing in the late 1950s, failing to qualify a Formula 1 car for that year's Monaco Grand Prix, a car that he'd actually bought for himself. And it was from there he went into driver management, with one of his clients being a young Austrian called Jochen Rindt. Bernie also bought into Rindt's F2 team, which was the Lotus F2 team at that time, becoming a part owner in 1970, just before Rindt died at that year's Italian Grand Prix, and Rindt became the first and only driver in Formula 1 history to be awarded the championship posthumously. Following this, Bernie was approached by Ron Toranak of the BRABHAM team, who wanted someone to buy into it to give it a bit of a cash injection. Bernie said, "I'll give you 100 grand for the lot," and took over, and set about moulding the team into his little project. He started by making sure BRABHAM concentrated all of its time, money and resources on making a good Formula 1 car, and promoted a young designer called Gordon Murray to the head of design. And then by 1974, BRABHAM was back to winning ways again. Well, the winning sort of came and went, but there was a car that used a massive fan to suck the car to the ground. But then Nelson Piquet joined the team and things started an upward trend. But the one thing that Bernie wanted to be involved in just as much as having a team was making this sport a global institution. So in 1974, Bernie set up a union called the Formula 1 Constructors Association, or FOCA as we'll call it from here on out. Now this was basically a union of the Garage Easter teams that was headed up by Bernie, and also had prominent members such as Colin Chapman of Lotus, Ken Tyrrell of Tyrrell, Teddy Meyer of McLaren, Frank Williams of, well, Williams, and also a guy called Max Mosley, who was one of the owners of March. The general premise of this union was to have more team control of the dividing up of money in Formula 1, given that the organisers of these races and the FIA were making an absolute metric boatload of money compared to the teams, who were getting virtually nothing in return by comparison. So between Bernie and Mosley, they set about making some of that money back. Max and Bernie got a deal done just in time for the 1976 Japanese Grand Prix, and at the meeting of the FOCA teams at that race, Bernie told them, "Right, I've just bought all of the Formula 1 TV rights for $1 million, and you're all entitled to 10%. Now 100 grand in 1976 is worth about $500,000 today, and that money would have gone a lot further in 1976 than it would today as well. And in the words of Lord Hesketh, who owned the Hesketh team, 9 idiots sat there thinking, I wonder how much testing I could do with $100,000. And then I said no. And then they all said no. And that's how Bernie took control. Pathetic really, but you know, that's how great fortunes are made. Bernie then said to all of the broadcasters, whether it was the BBC, the French broadcasters, the German ones, the Australian ones, the Brazilian ones, the American ones, the Canadians, whoever it might be, that if they wanted to buy these TV rights, they were more than welcome to buy these TV rights, but it was always written into the contract that if they bought them, they had to show every single race. He also dealt with each TV station that broadcasted these races individually, but in the English-speaking markets they used whatever feed was coming out of the UK at the time. So the BBC up until 1996, then from 1997 to 2008 it was ITV, back to the BBC, and now Sky Sports. The Olympics didn't adopt this system until 2014. And as we all know from that movie Rush, it rained, and it rained quite a bit for that race, and there was a big debate as to whether or not they would actually go racing, and there was a meeting and all sorts because they didn't think it was going to be particularly safe out there. That was until the race director came in and said, look lads, we've got to go racing because of the TV stuff. This got some of the drivers riled up, particularly Niki Lauda, who was probably the most vocal person in that room, given that 2 months ago, he was almost burned alive in his car at the Nürburgring. So Bernie decided that he had to put his foot down, and he basically told them, I don't care. You're racing. And not only did the world see the epic battle between Hunt and Lauda go down to the final race and see Hunt ultimately prevail through a comeback drive, the world also saw Lauda's testicular fortitude as he pulled into the pits to withdraw, as he saw it as being too dangerous, and was prepared to go against his mechanics lying about a problem with the car as well. What a man. Then in 1978, Professor Sid Watkins was appointed F1's official doctor as Bernie tried to standardise things, and Sid became the only person to whom Bernie would defer to. Now, Sid was initially not very liked by the circuit owners because they had their own doctors. Why would they need some English neurosurgeon with PhDs coming out of his arsehole telling them what to do? And according to the legend himself, after the German authorities banned him from the track, Bernie said, okay, pack up the cars, we're leaving. And the race controller said, well, what am I going to do with the 80,000 fans who are here? To which Bernie said, you can go and tell them to fuck themselves. And then they said, okay, the doctor can come back in. Then there was the 1978 Italian Grand Prix where Sid was barred from entering the track by the Italian police after Peterson's crash, which led to further standardisation of procedures across Formula 1, at Bernie's insistence to the FIA. Then there was a war, and we won't go into too much nitty-gritty here because that video is worth something all by itself. And basically what happened was Max and Bernie had a bit of a row with Balestri over things like safety and licenses and circuits, and races got cancelled, races became non-championship events, Goodyear threatened to pull out of the sport entirely. It all got very, very messy. So the three of them, along with the team owners, all locked themselves in an office in Paris and hashed out a 13-hour conference where they came up with some ideas. And this was all written down into what is known as the Concorde Agreement, named after the Place de Concorde, where the FIA's offices are. Under this contract, they agreed what each of the teams would get out of everything. What happened was they decided that 47% of the TV money would go to the teams. 30% of the TV money would go to the FIA, and the remaining 23% would go to Bernie and his company FOPA, or FOPA, which would also handle the prize money, allowing the term Grand Prix to be once again what it actually was, a big cash prize. And this kept everybody happy for a bit. Bernie then sold BRABHAM for about $5 million to another investor and was able to now run the whole TV rights thing by himself. And then they re-signed the Concorde Agreement again in 1987, and then again in 1997 they would come to sign it again. And it's here where Bernie started to take full control of everything, because in 1993, who would become the new president of the FIA? Well, that would be Max Mosley. By the start of the 1990s, the TV revenue for Formula 1 was in the region of about $12.5 million, but by 1996, that number had gone up by another $100 million. Now, sponsors, particularly on the tobacco side, were pumping in money. There was the rise of F1's new global megastar Michael Schumacher, who was probably the first young up-and-coming driver to really take advantage of the whole being on TV thing in Formula 1. Yes, there was Mansell and Senna and Prost and the stuff they got up to, but Schumacher was really in the right place at the right time when the Formula 1 on TV stuff was really starting to kick off, and there was new interest in new markets being generated all the time. Under the first and second Concorde Agreements, the teams controlled the financial side of the commercial rights, but the FIA still owned the commercial rights, so everybody was making their money. But when it all came up for renewal again in sort of the late 1990s, the FIA decided that it was going to sell these rights, or at least lease these rights, to one person or one entity for a predetermined length of time. So Bernie put in a bid through his company FOCA Administration, which would later be renamed Formula 1 Management, or FOM. Under this deal, Bernie would basically be leasing the commercial rights to Formula 1 for 14 years, but the returns he was making on his investments were insane. The FIA would be paid $10 million per year by Bernie for the privilege, but with the income coming in from the TV rights and licensing on video games and everything else that Bernie was able to cash in on, FOM made an estimated 800% profit just within 1997. 21 years following that initial purchase of those TV rights in 1976, Bernie now had complete and total control. Drivers were now earning way more money than they ever were before, the sponsors were putting in even more money, the engine sounded great, it was being beamed into everybody's homes on free-to-air television every other Sunday or so, and names like Fernando Alonso, Michael Schumacher, Jenson Button and Kimi Raikkonen all became household names in their home countries. He could now add circuits to the calendar, signing multi-million-dollar contracts, and this helped open up F1 to new markets in the Middle East, China, India, South Korea, and open things back up in the United States with going to Indianapolis. And all those locations visited with varying degrees of success, it has to be said. Now, however, Formula One is in the hands of Liberty Media, and while their proposed takeover was initially perceived to be a breath of fresh air for the sport, given how Bernie wouldn't embrace social media and stuff like that, the perceived Americanization of the sport has left some older fans with a bitter taste in their mouths, and are starting to long for the days when Bernie ran the place with an iron fist and wish those days would come back. As long as he doesn't suggest the sprinkler system idea again or those medals. So then, a look at how Bernie Ecclestone turned Formula One into the multi-billion-dollar global juggernaut that it is today. If you've learned something new here today, then be sure to give the video a like, and if you want more stuff like this and you're not subscribed already, click that subscribe button, and also get that bell button tapped or clicked or whatever you want to do with it, so you never miss out on a future video. Big up to the Patreon Massive, and if you want to help support the channel so I can license more detailed images for these videos, you can help out by following the link in the description, as well as finding links down there to my socials and also to Discord. So until next time, I've been Millward, have a great day wherever you live in the world, and I'll see you all again soon for another video. Goodbye.